Good to be with y'all tonight. It's been a great pleasure to be with y'all this weekend, and I'm really encouraged and just appreciative of the good work that I see here, and keep doing that. I appreciate you all, and it's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation to come, and thank you for the opportunity and for your attention. Young people, I want to talk to you guys tonight about some things, and I want to begin with the fact I want you to appreciate how much of a blessing and responsibility you guys have. There are a lot of people in the world, a lot of people that would give almost everything, if not everything they have, if they could go back in time and redo some of their decisions by having the chance to be your age. You're at a point in life where you make lots of important decisions, and some of those decisions lead to a good way, and some of those decisions lead to a bad way. And there's a lot of people that made the wrong decisions. And if they could have a time machine and back up and be where you're at, they would be so happy to do that. But they can't. And because they can't, they're stuck with the circumstances that they're in. They can be forgiven by God of sin. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And anybody can be forgiven. 2 Peter 3 says that God isn't wishing that anybody should perish, but that all would come to repentance. But there was the brother in Alabama who, when he was young, he started hanging out with some guys that were up to no good. They started smoking. They started stealing some things. They started stealing some more things. And then eventually they went into a home to steal some stuff, and the homeowner was there. And there ended up being gunplay, and the homeowner was killed. And so he was tried and found guilty of murder. And he returned to the Lord. He'd been brought up going to church. And on death row, he returned to the Lord, but he was scheduled to die. And what he did in that last part of his life was not complain and whine, but he tried to get the message out to other young people. Don't do what I did. There's people that end up with venereal diseases. There's people that end up having to have parts of their body amputated as a result of that. There's people that end up in a real mess with things like that, and they can't go back in time and change it. There's my buddy who had a good job, had a good wife, had good kids, but he was being dishonest, and he was lying about some financial matters to his wife, and she found out about it, and it destroyed the love in the marriage. And then she fell in love with another man, and the kids are watching this happen, and they had to end up selling their beautiful home. There was a divorce, and all these beautiful things they had going, so many things fell apart. And he can't go back and put that all back together again. I got a friend of mine, and had a good job, had a wife, had kids, but he let himself get involved in an extramarital affair. And it led eventually to, he's divorced and in a huge amount of debt, doesn't have a right to remarry. And now his little boy is being raised by the mom who has left the Lord, and she's all into like LGBTQ and starting to take his little boy and like do feminine things like paint his nails and things like this. And that's his boy, but he's not there to be able to change direction of things. Those are just a few examples of types of things that happen. And the types of people that if they could go back, because they can be forgiven, but being forgiven doesn't always change the consequences. And if they could go back and decide, this time I'm not going to lie. This time I'm not going to hang with the wrong crowd. This time I'm not going to start paying attention to that waitress and flirting with her. What a difference their life would be today, but that's gone. They can still serve the Lord. They can still be forgiven. But they've cost themselves a lot of the blessings that they could have. So you guys are in a position where you're going to be making in the next few years all sorts of decisions. You're going to make decisions, and some of you are old enough, you're already making some of these decisions. Some of you will be making them in a few years. But making decisions about what kind of job you're going to have, what kind of life you're going to live, how you're going to handle money. And by the way, the book of Proverbs has a whole lot of stuff about that as well. And about if you choose to get married, what kind of a spouse to be. And decisions on what kind of a spouse to look for. That makes a world of difference. And of course, whether or not you're going to serve the Lord. Make those good decisions, and remember that in Deuteronomy chapter 6 it says God's commandments are for our good always. They're not always enjoyable at the moment, but they're for our good. And I'll give a quick illustration and then we'll start getting into some texts. Nutrition and exercise. Is nutritious food always tastier than unhealthy food? Now, sometimes that unhealthy food tastes really good. And do you always feel like exercising when it would be a good time to exercise? No, sometimes you're tired and you don't but what happens when you go ahead and do the exercise? How do you feel afterwards? You get the benefits. And if you continually make good nutrition choices with some special things now and then, that pays off. Life is a lot like that. Don't just make the easy decisions. Make good decisions, because roads lead places. Proverbs 4 talks about walking in the light. Psalms says that God's word is a light to our feet. And I want you to think about, in ancient Israel, how much more vivid that would be than for us. Because I bet everybody here drove here tonight. I bet nobody walked through a mountain trail to get here. But in ancient times, people walked on trails a lot, and sometimes they were in hills and mountains. And I live near the Appalachian Trail. And I tell you what you don't want to do. You don't want to run on the Appalachian Trail at night, because there's rocks, there's roots, there's fallen trees, and you will fall and hit the ground before you know what you tripped over. And the book of Proverbs says that. It says that the wicked stumble and they don't even know what they stumbled at because they were walking in darkness. Jesus talks about roads. He says, enter the straight and narrow way, enter the narrow gate, because the broad way leads to destruction, and you don't want to do that. All right, so several things we want to talk about in specific. First off, just the role of the home. If you're planning to get married, and you don't have to. Jesus didn't get married, Jeremiah didn't get married, Paul didn't get married. You can do great things without getting married. But if you'd like to get married someday, be thinking about your family now. Because I'm going to tell you something. You're already, if you're planning to have a family, you're already building your family. Here's why. Young men, who's going to be the father and the husband and the head of your family? It's you. You're building right now the man that woman is going to depend on, and those kids are going to depend on. You're already building that man. You don't be a boy and then just all of a sudden one day take on a wife and kids. you're building the man that they will depend on. Young ladies, who's going to be the mother of your children if you choose to get married and have children? Who's going to be the wife in that family? That's you. You're already building that young lady that's going to be able to do all the phenomenal things that will make the world such a blessing for your family and such a blessing for people that know your family. You're building that lady right now. So even though you might not know who you're going to marry, and you don't know what, if your first kid is going to be a boy or a girl or what their name's going to be, you're already building the part of the family that you are. Build it well, and that will be a blessing to your wives, and that will be a blessing to your husbands, and that will be a blessing to your children. And make it a home where, number one, who's to be served? What did Joshua say? As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And who's the head of the home? The man is the head of the home. The wife is to submit to his leadership. He is to give honor, 1 Peter 3, to his wife. And he is, Ephesians chapter 5, to love her sacrificially the way Christ loved the church. Let's turn over there and read that. Ephesians chapter 5. Verse 22, wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. For as the husband is the head of the wife, for as the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So guys, you will need to be a leader, but not a dictatorial leader, living there to just get things your way. You're to love your wife the way Christ loved the church, and the verse tells us how Christ loved the church. Look back at it, make sure you see it. How did Christ love the church? He gave himself up for her. He sacrificed himself for her. So you need to be that sacrificial leader. You're not going to be in charge of your family so you can make everything go your way. You're in charge of your family so that your family will have what they need. And that'll take sacrifice from you, sacrificing for your wife, sacrificing for your kids. And girls, pick out somebody that you're going to respect, because you're going to be required to respect him and follow him. So that means you need to be really careful who you pick out. Because you remember what Jesus said about people following the Pharisees. If the blind follow the blind, they're both going to go in the ditch. Don't pick a man you don't respect. He may have a cool car. He may dress in some cool clothes. He may tell some funny jokes. But if he's not respectable, that's not who you want to hook your life to. One other thing you want to think about is this. Guys, it's natural you're going to be looking for a woman that you're in love with and that she's attractive to you and you're excited to be married to her, but she's also going to be the mother of your children. There's a lot of good-looking girls that if you stop and think about it, you'd realize that's not who I want to be the mother of my children. Girls, when you pick a guy to marry, you're picking the father of your children if the Lord blesses you with children. And again, it doesn't matter how cool his car is or how, whether he's first string or whatever on the football team. If he's not the guy that needs to be the father of your children, that's not the guy to be with. Pick somebody who will be that. And then finally, Ephesians 6. Here it's talking about children and their relationship to their parents. And some of you may be out on your own already. most of you probably aren't. So let's read this verse and see what it says about children and parents. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. So there was two verbs there. They don't mean the same thing, but they're similar. It was obey your parents, and it was honor your parents. They overlap a lot, don't they? If you honor your parents, you're going to be obeying your parents, etc. Can you obey without honoring? Mom says, take out the trash. And you go, I'll do it when I feel like it. And you take out the trash when you feel like it. Did you obey? You took out the trash. Did you honor your mother? Not at all. Obey is what you should do while you're still at home and under your parents. There's going to be the time when you're not. What does Genesis 2:24 say? For this cause a man shall leave father and mother and cleave to his wife. And now that's your family. You can still love your folks and everything, but you're not under dad's rule anymore. Now this is a new family. But you should still honor them. Don't stop honoring your parents even after you don't have to obey them. For example, you remember in Mark 7 when Jesus condemned the Pharisees for the rule making that they were making? They were breaking God's rules to obey their own. One of their rules was that if you said to your parents korban, you didn't have to give them any money or anything. It's kind of the opposite of writing a child out of the will. When a parent writes a child out of the will, they're mad at their kid. You know, he's however age he is, maybe he's 30 years old. I'm writing you out of the will. Korban was kind of the opposite. I'm not going to give my parents anything. And the way they did it was by saying it was korban. Everything I've got is given to God, even if they didn't give it to God. It's just a declaration. And then after that, the rabbis said they didn't have to give anything to their parents. Jesus condemned that. He said, here's the rule that you're following, but the Bible said, honor your father and mother. See, even after you're grown, you can still honor your father and mother. So I want to share something with you in relationship to my dad. When I was little, I was taught to say yes, sir, and so Dad would say something, I'd say, yes, sir. Yes, sir. When I got older and I got around high school, I think it slipped into, yeah, okay. After I got grown, and after I got married, and after I had kids, I started thinking about it and thinking about the respect I had for my dad and what I owed him. And so when I was around 30 or so, I started going back to saying yes, sir, to my dad. So now when Dad says something to me, I like to say, yes, sir. Not because I'm still at home, not because he tells me what to do, but that man raised me. I'd say my mom, but my mom passed away some years ago, and so she's not here anymore. But they raised me, and they sacrificed a lot for me. And so I want to show that honor to them. So show honor to your folks. Next, I want to talk about Luke chapter 15. Everybody turn, please, to Luke chapter 15. This is a story about a lost son. And in a sense, there's there's really two messed up sons here. The purpose of the parable originally was about not being the second son, the self-righteous one at the end. Because this parable of these two sons started with the following in Luke chapter 15 and verse 1. It said, tax collectors and sinners were gathering around to hear him, but the Pharisees and teachers of the law murmured and said, he's eating, he welcomes sinners and he eats with them. So these self-righteous Pharisees are upset because Jesus is associating with people that they look down on. So Jesus gives three parables. Lost sheep. Guy has a whole bunch of sheep. One of them's missing. Which one is he concerned about? The lost one. When he finds it, He's not like bad sheep. He's glad he found his sheep. He wanted to rescue the sheep. Woman has 10 pieces of silver. One's missing. She hunts and hunts till she finds it. She doesn't throw it away. She wants it saved. Third parable is the lost son. And this is one of my favorite parables in the Bible. The point of it, the spiritual point, is going to be this. One son does wickedly and goes far away from the father. The father represents God. One son doesn't go and do everything he did, but when this wicked, rebellious son comes back, the self-righteous son resents it. And that's the Pharisees. But tonight, I want to look at with you at the family aspect of this, because there's some really interesting family dynamics. So let's look at this. Luke chapter 15, verse 11. Jesus continued, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to the father, Father, give me my share of the estate. And he divided his property between them. Not long after, the younger son got together all that he had, set off for a different country, and there squanders his wealth in wild living. After he spent everything, there arose a severe famine in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him in the fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. So there's a lot to think about here. First off, and I want to mention this, parents, this is a point we didn't go over this morning, but I'll throw it in real quickly here. Notice the birth order. Both of these boys have their problems. One's self-righteous and unloving. The other is irresponsible and wicked and wasteful. What was the birth order? Who's the self-righteous, arrogant son? Firstborn. Who's the irresponsible one? The latter-born. Why is that so? Now, what I'm about to say is a generality. There are some people probably in here, and I've met them other times, who are firstborns, but they have lastborn personalities, or lastborns and they have firstborn personalities. But there's a general pattern that Jesus' words kind of echo here, because he didn't have to tell us which one was older. But years ago, I was talking with a woman, and she had 2 children, and one, she was married to a good man, and they had a family business together. They were good people in the community. They had a nice home. They were responsible. They had really nice kids. And the other one didn't have a job, and he lived in the garage and smoked pot. I said to her, is he your younger one? She went, how did you know? Because it's a little bit of a common pattern. It's not always this way. There's lots of godly youngest in the family. And sometimes there's real irresponsible firstborns. But it repeats itself often enough that it's a tendency. So if you will stop and think about uncles and aunts and families that you know of, see if you recognize this pattern. The firstborn was aiming to grow up, wanted to do well in school, get their homework done and everything. They got the job, they're paying the mortgage, everything's going to be on time, they're keeping their family together. And if you're talking to the family, so how's he doing? Oh, he's doing real well, he's got a promotion, and oh, he's doing real well. And you get to another one, how's he doing? Well, his parole officer said he's doing a lot better this time. And, doesn't have a job yet, but we're trying not to stress him out too much. Why does that happen? Let me give you a few reasons real quickly. Number one, parents, when you had your first child, how much of your parenting time did they get? 100%. By the time you get to child number 4, does that child get 100% of your parenting time? They can't. Now, there's some other blessings that they can have relationships with their siblings, and their siblings can help them, but you don't have as much time. Secondly, with child number one, were you careful? Child number one, when you brought child number one home from the hospital and you started that first diaper change, how careful were you? Did you use the ointment to prevent the rash and the powder and do it real carefully and everything, right? And if the pacifier fell on the floor at 7-Eleven, what did you do? You threw it away or you sterilized it, right? All right. And after, why? Because you don't want anything terrible to happen to this child. And you were also really careful with that child. And when he wanted a cookie from grandma, what did he have to say? He had to say please. And if he didn't say please, did he get a cookie? He did not. And if he didn't say thank you, did he get to keep the cookie? No, he did not. And so you were really careful. And then that guy got up to 5 or 6 years old, and what did everybody say about your firstborn? He's so good. He's such a good boy. How'd you do that? And you start thinking, well, that's pretty easy. And then you have another one and another one. And that was a lot of work, but you know, as they came out, he came out so good, you start deciding, you know, we don't have to worry about all that as much. So child number two, pacifier falls on the ground, cold water will do. A friend of mine the other day, we were in a construction site. There's filthy floor and everything. His baby's pacifier went on the ground. He just went and stuck it in the kid's mouth. Child number four, you know, you might just wipe it off on your jeans. Child number five, just stick it straight in. Because you've realized they weren't as delicate as you thought they were. How did you find that out? Because when you were so careful about the pacifier and then you walked in and you found them licking the bottom of a boot or eating out of a dog food thing or something, or they found gum on the bottom of the seat and they didn't die. And so you let up. And child number 4 and 5 and 6, and even though I've said this for years, my parents, my kids, my older kids would tell me that number 6 for us got away with more than they did. It's just an easy trap to fall into. He survived, whether you did the pacifier that way or not. But you know why the firstborn had good manners? Because you were careful and trained him. And if you don't do it for the lastborn, it's not going to come as naturally. Here's another thing. Firstborn, if you were a firstborn, when you came into the world, who was in the house? 100% of the people in the house were adults. Babies are imitators. They're mimics. So when you come into a world that has nothing but adults, what's the behavior that you're immediately trying to copy and imitate? You're trying to copy and imitate adult behavior. If you come into a house where there's 2 adults and there's an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, you've got a wide variety of models to imitate. So sometimes they're not as pushed to be adult. And lastly, moms, do you remember your firstborn? Do you remember waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for his first word? Waiting and waiting and waiting for his first smile? Waiting and waiting and waiting for his first tooth and his first step? And maybe you had a baby book and you were putting stickers down and marking the days and everything. You wanted it to happen soon and you were excited because you wanted it to happen sooner and sooner and sooner, right? You remember that? And then he grew up and now he's 9. And you've got, wow, that happened fast. And so what do a lot of moms say when they have their last baby? I don't want this one to grow up too fast. And so you leave the pacifier in longer. You leave the diapers on in longer. Let them waddle around. That's cute. We'll worry about that later. Okay, if they potty train 6 months later, that's not the end of the world. But I'll tell you what kind of is. He's 34 and he lives in the garage and he doesn't have a job and he's smoking pot. And mom gives him a car. And what do the first and second born say? Mom, why did you give him a car? He's a bum. And Mom says, don't you say that about my baby. So don't do that. Things will be different. The other thing is, the last born gets to learn from all his siblings. You can have wonderful, wonderful lastborns. My lastborn son, I'm really proud of him. He's a really good guy. It's not that they have, but we have to watch it, lest we stop giving the lastborn what they need and deserve. Because being the lastborn in the family doesn't mean you're going to be the baby forever. Just like the firstborn, that's a little while. So prepare them for that. All right, next thing we want to learn from this. Back to the young people. What did the younger one want to do? What did he want from his father? The money. What does he not want from his father? Anything else. Because where did he go as soon as he got the money? Luke says, not long after that, he went where? To a far country. Why not just go across town? Across the street? Why do you suppose he goes to a far country? He wants away from his dad, away from his dad's rules, away from his dad's observation. He's sick and tired, if you can imagine it, with, boys, time to go to bed. We got a lot of work to do on the farm tomorrow. Boys, time to get up. Boys, don't be doing that. He's sick of that. He's tired of it. And he wants to go do what he wants to do and live how he wants to live. And he knows his dad's not going to approve. So where does he want to be? Far country. What does that symbolize for us? Well, we've done that with God. When we mentioned it this morning, but I'll make this point again. Even atheists want God's blessings. They don't know they're God's blessings, but if you know any atheists, do they like the sun to come up in the morning? Yeah. Do they like fresh air and water in spring and fall and all the blessings of nature? Atheists want God's blessings, but they don't want God's rules. And that's where this young man is. He wants the blessings, but not the rules. So, Dad, give me the inheritance that belongs to me. So here's what we're leading up to. Young people, have you ever had this conversation with your parents? I'm X number of years old. I ought to be able to fill in the blank. You ever had that conversation? Maybe. I'm 16. I ought to be able to have my own car. I'm 17. I ought to be able to stay out as late as I want. I'm 18. I ought to be able to do this. I'm 12. I ought to be able to do this. Here's what I want you to think about if you've ever had that mentality. Most of the time when a teenager says those words, I'm X number of years old, I ought to be able to, they're filling in that last blank with a privilege and not a responsibility. It would be much more mature to say something like this. I'm 16 years old. I ought to be able to change the oil. You know, I'm driving the car too. You know, Dad, I'll change the oil for you this time. I should do that. Mom, I'm X number of years old. I ought to do some laundry. Mom, I'm this old. I ought to fix lunch for us something in a while. And if you're an older child, you know, son or daughter, and you're still living at home and you've got a job making money, Dad, I'm 20 years old. I ought to be pitching in on the, you know, real estate tax or on the utilities or something. That would be a mature approach, but what's our young man's approach here? I get the privilege. Give me the money. I don't want to wait until you die because I want it now. So he takes the money and look what he did. He went and wasted it in riotous living. Later, the older brother's going to say he wasted it on harlots. So he's just living wicked, using the money wastefully, and where does he end up? Feeding pigs, wishing he could have pig food. Why is that especially powerful? Jesus was a Jew talking to Jewish people. So what type of person would all of them be picturing as he told this story? A Jewish boy. So this is a Jewish boy wishing he could have it as good as a pig. Now, most of us wouldn't want to be in that situation, but if you stop and remember how Jews view pigs, that's especially powerful. This guy's gotten to a point in life where he wishes he had it as good as a pig, and he doesn't. Then something really beautiful happens. Look at the text. One of you young men, please read verse 17 and 18. 17 and 18 together, through 19, please. 17 through 19. Everybody listen to this.
But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you."
All right. So he's repentant, and he's going to go apologize, and he does. And even though the father's happy to see him, he still apologizes, and that's beautiful, and he's forgiven. But something else beautiful has happened here. What has his attitude changed about in regard to privilege and responsibility? When we first saw him, how much responsibility did he want? None. How much privilege did he want? All of it. Give me all the inheritance for me. Runs away, parties it off. Doesn't look like he's working at all. Just parties it away. Riotous living. Now, what does he say? I don't deserve the privilege. I'm not worthy to be your son. Let me work as a hired servant. See what he's ready for now? Responsibility. He's learned a lesson. Life is not all about demanding privilege. It's about accepting responsibility. Parents, what's the last thing the text said before these words? He came to himself. Parents, look at your Bible and see what the last words were before he came to himself. Kevin, what's the last words before he came to himself? No one gave him anything. If Grandma had said, "Oh, you poor darling, let me send you my Discover card. I heard there's a famine," he wouldn't have come to himself. He put himself in this hole, and he needed to learn from this. Let me tell you, there's different ways we can learn. Best way to learn is to learn from the Word of God. Another way to learn is to learn from your parents. Listen to them. Your parents aren't perfect, but they want to help you go in the right way. Next way you can learn is to learn from people that made mistakes, and you realize, oh, I don't want to make that mistake. The hardest way to learn, but we've all learned a few lessons at least this way, is when we do the stupid things ourselves. And that's the way this guy had to learn. He did some really stupid things. It went really, really badly, and nobody gave him anything. So when you have that son or grandson that is just refusing to accept responsibility, and they're just behaving horribly, and you keep giving to them, what are you doing? You're enabling them. This guy came to his senses when nobody gave him anything. And he comes back. And let's see how the father, who represents God in this story, let's see how he responds. I've lost my place here. Yeah. Starting there in verse 21. Verse 20, he got up and went to his father. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him, was filled with compassion for him, ran to him, threw his arm around his neck, and the son said, "Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." The father said, "Quick, bring the best robe, put it on him, put the ring on his finger, sandals on his feet, bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And he began to celebrate. And we're not going to take time to read the end, but that's where the other brother then gets all offended. You never threw me a party, all that. And when this son of yours, but he's not thinking, hey, this brother of mine is back. There's no love there. It's just jealousy and vengeance and lack of love. And it represents the Pharisees. But there's powerful lessons there for us to learn from that. Real life, guys, when you're 4, you might think, whoa, when I grow up, I can do anything I want. No, kind of 4 is the time that you get to have things more free. Adults, does adulthood mean you get to do whatever you want? No, that's not adulthood. There's tons of responsibilities that go with adulthood. The more you meet your responsibilities, the more privileges you get to enjoy. But put those privileges ahead of put the responsibilities ahead of the privilege. And then I want to talk about this before we end, and it's love. So, guys, let's suppose that one of you has fallen in love, and you're telling the other guys about it. You say, I'm in love. I'm going to ask her to marry me. And you say, you really love her? Oh, yeah, I love her. You sure? Yeah. Oh, man, I'm really in love. And you say, what do you love about her? What's he going to say? He might say, oh, I just really love the way she looks. I just love her face. I love her hair. I love the way she flicks it. I love the way she laughs and touches my arm when I tell a funny joke. I love the way she walks. I love the way she holds my hand when I'm going along. I love the way she looks. I love the way she's shaped. I just love her. Okay, you're obviously attracted to her. Do you love her? Scenario. So you propose to her, and so somebody's doing some marriage counseling. You understand marriage is for life? Oh yeah. I love her. First couple I ever married, I sat down and talked with them. You understand this is for life? You love each other, and it's for. Oh yeah, we're in love. Yeah. That marriage lasted 7 months. Yeah, and it was over. But you love her, and he proposes to her, and she says yes. And it's a week before the wedding, right? And she's in a terrible accident. And she's burned. And that beautiful skin that you like is now scarred. And that beautiful hair was burned off. And you love the way she walked, but now she's crippled and she can't walk anymore. Still love her? Now, if a tragedy like that happened before the wedding, it would probably be wisest for everybody to pause, let her recuperate from things and think about things. But the fact is, his description of love, when you asked him, do you really love her, analyze his description of love. Everything he said about how he loved her was based on what? What he gets. You know what love is really about? In love, when you're in love with a good woman, she's in love with you, you do get to do a lot of getting, and she does too. But real love is not just about getting. You know what real love is about? I'm going to give you a clue, and you all know the answer to it, you just don't realize it yet. I'm going to quote a verse, and the word is going to pop into your mind. For God so loved the world that he gave. Real love is about giving. It's not about just taking. If you marry that girl just because what I'm going to get, and if you marry that guy just because what you're going to get, then you could be headed for trouble. Because sooner or later, he's not going to think he's getting enough of what he wants, or she's not getting enough of what he wants. And if I'm not getting enough of what I want, I'm going to give less. And if he's giving less, I'm going to give less. And you give less and less and less, and it becomes a battle of not giving, and then all the love is destroyed because it wasn't really very much love to begin with. You know what we say when we get married? Do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, to keep yourself to him or her alone, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health? There's a couple I know, and I knew him when he was healthy, and then he lost his health. Terrible disease struck him, and now he's just incapacitated, and he's just an invalid. And oftentimes his mind isn't even right. And his wife, who was a young woman, an attractive woman, when the disease hit him, she has stayed with him all these years, and she takes care of it. And he would have done that for her if it would have gone the other way, because they understood what love and vows meant, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health. I want to tell you a quick story. Dr. Laura Schlesinger, some of you probably heard her on the radio back when she had her program. One time she had a letter from somebody, a woman out in the Northwest, and it was really interesting. She said that she got married late because she was looking for qualities in a spouse. And all her friends thought she was pretty unromantic. They thought, no, you go to a party club or whatever, you see some guy and it's love at first sight and you just fall for him. And she was like, no. And she had a list. She had a list of qualities that she was looking for. And her other friends would get married and stuff, and years went by and she was not married. And then she met a man who had character qualities that she was looking for. And he also had a list. And he fit her list, and she fit his. And they got married. And they were happy. And then she got hit with a terrible disease. And she lost control of her body. And she became morbidly obese. And she could not walk around. And he never complained. And she couldn't even bathe herself anymore. And he would have a chair in the shower and he would help get her in there. And he would shampoo her hair and bathe her and compliment her, and he loved her. And then there's a nice ending to the story. The disease reversed its course and she got her health back, which was a great blessing for her, and it was a great blessing for him. But she found out something about her husband. But she kind of knew that before, because she was looking for somebody with quality, not just selfishness. So I encourage you guys, if you choose to get married, choose wisely. Girls, choose wisely. Don't choose superficially. Choose wisely. Guys, choose wisely. I don't saying marry a girl that you're not attracted to. I would marry a girl I was attracted to too. That's what I did. But you got to look for more than that. One of the things that made my wife catch my attention was when I realized, wow, she's a better person than me, and that would be good for me. Choose somebody that will love God more than you. Now, somebody might think, well, that doesn't sound very romantic. I don't want to be second fiddle. Yeah, you better be second fiddle. If somebody doesn't love God more than you, because let me tell you something, when you're first dating and you're all excited about that person, that's not the way you're going to feel every day, every week, especially when things get hard and there's some arguments. Sometimes you're going to be irritated with each other. And when you're irritated with each other and annoyed with each other, love for God helps you to say, you know what, I need to apologize even though I don't feel like it. And love for God moves you to say, I need to forgive even though part of me wants to hang into it. Nope, I'm going to do what God said. Loving God helps make better wives and helps make better husbands. If it's all about how I feel right now, then someday when things are hard and you don't have the same feeling, you can start wanting to walk away. When you both love God more than each other, that brings a real blessing to each other, and that'll bring a blessing to your kids. Thank you guys for listening tonight. Make good decisions, and may God bless you all. If there's anybody that needs to respond to the invitation, won't you do so as we stand and sing?